Thanks very much, Simon. No mai, haere mai. Welcome to the battle of the two Chris's. The leaders of our main political parties are about to go head-to-head live for the first time as they fight for your vote. This is it, 25 days out. The countdown is on. Good evening. Thank you for joining us for the first leaders' debate of the election. This is your chance to rate the two men vying to be our next Prime Minister. Here they are, Labour leader Chris Hipkins and Nationals Chris Luxon. They both believe they're the right man for the top job. So what's their plan to make New Zealand more affordable, safe and competitive? We're going to talk to them about the ballooning cost of living, housing, crime, fixing our broken health system and climate change. And I'll be asking on your behalf why we should trust them and whether they'll actually stick to their promises. We'll also be putting questions to them from Kiwi voters about the issues that matter most to some of you. Plus, along for the ride, our studio audience watching it all unfold before them. And make sure you stick around because right after the debate, Jack Tame will be joined by our specialist panel to analyse the performance of the two leaders. And just a note, we have sign language interpreters on hand. You can see them on channel 200. Right. We tossed a coin, one of the leaders will start the night, the other leader will finish it. They each have 30 seconds now to deliver their vision for New Zealanders. So let's begin with you, Chris Hipkins.
You're going to hear a lot of words tonight from Christopher and myself, but the key thing I want you all to remember is this. You don't take our country forward by winding things back. You don't deal with the climate crisis by sitting on your hands. You don't make housing more affordable by bringing back foreign millionaires. You don't help with the cost of living by cutting jobs and critical public services. My plan is to get inflation down and to keep helping you with the cost of living while moving our country forward. I'm not promising perfection, but I will be honest with you and I will have your back.
Right, Christopher Luxon.
Thank you, Jess. Chris, good evening, everybody. This election is all about the economy and which party can rebuild it and reduce the cost of living so you can get ahead. New Zealanders watching tonight know we're going backwards and that the economy is in bad shape. They see it and they feel it every day. But it doesn't have to be like this. We can be so much better. This election, you can vote for change, for fixing the economy and bringing down the cost of living, for restoring law and order and delivering better health and education. And to deliver that change and get New Zealand back on track, party vote National.
Chris Luxon, you mentioned there about the bad shape of the economy. What can you promise viewers watching at home tonight? What relief will you give them over the next 12 months?
Well, I want to give low and middle income New Zealanders tax relief. I think they are the people that wake up at 7 a.m. in the morning, they slog their guts out, they pay their taxes, they get their kids to school, they often take on a second job just to deal with the spiralling cost of things. They deserve a break and I'm going to give them tax relief. For an average household income family with young kids, that would mean $250 a fortnight and that would make a huge difference to them.
That comes with a very large price tag, $15 billion. Is that really affordable?
Yeah, because we've built our tax plan independently of the fiscal plan. We've made it self-funding by generating savings from within wasteful government spending, and at the same time we've raised new sources of revenue. And the combination of all of that means that we're able to give relief to low and middle income workers, what I call the squeeze middle, the people that are doing it incredibly tough in this country.
Chris Hipkins, your promise is around GST. Is that really going to make a difference? $5 a week for the average family?
I've set out a 10-point cost of living plan that is going to support New Zealanders through the current cost of living crunch. There's two things you need to do in a cost of living crisis. You need to bring inflation back down again and you need to support New Zealanders through that. We are winning the battle on inflation. It's coming back down again. Nationals tax cuts would make inflation worse. And they want to cut all of the targeted supports that we're putting putting in place to support Kiwis with the cost of living. Things like free early childhood education for 2-year-olds, taking away the prescription co-payment. These are things that the National Party wants to take away. Discounted public transport for young New Zealanders. They want to take those things away to pay for tax cuts that for many New Zealanders won't actually give them $150 a week. If you're on an average income and you don't have children, you'd be looking at maybe $25 a week if you're lucky.
But I'll tell you, Chris, sorry, Jessica, I'll tell you better. You know, it's better than a couple of cents off your beans and carrots, right? I mean, let's be clear. None of that GST coming off fruit and vegetables is going through to customers or consumers. You know, everyone says it's going to go to the supermarkets. Your own Minister of Finance, Grant Robertson, said doesn't believe in it, and your own tax expert group didn't say they believe in it.
The National Party simply doesn't add up. They don't know how they're going to pay for it.
To consumers.
Sorry, what was that?
How will you make sure those savings are passed on to consumers?
Well, that's why we've established a grocery commissioner. We acknowledge now New Zealanders are paying too much at the supermarket because there isn't enough competition in our supermarket sector. Supermarkets are making over $1 billion a week in excess profits because they're not passing those on to consumers. That's why we've established the grocery commissioner.
So what you're doing is you're asking New Zealanders sitting at home to say, hey, ignore that $125 a week. We've got $5 for you in GST. Wouldn't they pick the tax cuts? Well,
hang on a minute. You've just conflated things. National's not promising people $125 a week.
Well,
they're saying that if you've got 2 kids across a fortnight, you might get something that's akin to that. This is the thing about the National Party. It's all about marketing and spin. When you break it down, the National Party's tax cuts don't actually add up that much to most New Zealanders.
So what do you
say National can't say how they're going to pay for it. Well, look, their plan does not add up. It does $6 billion worth of cuts, and they can't say what public services they're going to cut, and let alone the $20 billion worth of New Zealand homes that they want to sell to foreign home buyers to pay for it.
I've got to close this out because, I mean, honestly, you know, Chris has got a plan to take GST off fruit and vegetables. He's suggesting that a grocery commissioner is going to go around with a clipboard looking at the price of bananas up and down this country. You get a couple of cents off your fruit and vegetables, and then what he's gone and done is increased tax on fuel. So every freight carrier that's moving food from the farm to the store actually has an increase in cost. The price of food goes up. So on the one hand, he gives you a couple of cents off your beans and your carrots, and on the other hand, he slugs you with some food.
The National Party's also going to be putting up the price of petrol. The National Party's also going to be putting up the price of petrol.
I want to dig into the foreign buyers tax.
Not in our first term. We're not going to increase the price of fuel.
On the foreign buyers tax, what if you're wrong?
Well, look, I'll tell you what we're doing here, right? Just zoom out, big picture. What are we trying to do? We're trying to give low and middle income New Zealanders, the squeezed middle, some tax relief.
I get it, but what if you're wrong on the foreign buyers tax?
So let me step you through it. Before the foreign buyer ban was in place, there was 4,100 houses sold to foreigners. We've looked at a whole range of factors and we've come to saying, let's be really conservative. We think we can sell 1,600 to 1,700 houses to foreigners, actually at about almost $3 million average price, at a 15% tax. That all adds up, and actually as a result, we've had that independently verified by independent economists who've actually said that's quite plausible, that's quite conservative.
Why aren't you providing the modelling? I do find it perplexing. Why have you chosen not to do that?
Well, look, we have.
Do people not care?
We've had our numbers independently reviewed by independent economists.
But why not make
I'd just say to you, economists will actually be arguing about the pros and cons of all of that, and I get that. All I'd just say to you is no economist is arguing about the value of GST or fruit and vegetables, right? They're not releasing the numbers because they know they don't add up. The reality is they can't sell $5 billion worth of Kiwi homes every year. They're also banking on New Zealanders gambling online more in order to pay for their tax cuts. And let's not forget the $6 billion worth of public sector spending cuts that they want to make, and they're not telling New Zealanders what they're going to cut. Look, Chris is a bit bent out of shape because actually the Labour Party and the CTU used to actually support working people. I support working people. I want hard-working, low and middle-income Kiwis to get tax relief to deal with the cost of living crisis.
You support working people by making their wages grow. You support working families by making sure their wages are growing.
Correct.
And yet the National Party has opposed every increase to the minimum wage.
No, we'll support minimum wage
workers are earning $7 an hour more under our government. Every one of those increases opposed by National.
James Shaw came out at the finance debate in Queenstown and said people just don't care about where the money for tax cuts come from. They just care about tax cuts. What's your response to that?
Well, actually, we are, prudent, serious financial managers of this economy. Let's be clear. Chris and his team have had economic mismanagement on a scale we've never seen before. Caused huge amounts of pain and suffering for Kiwis up and down this country. So when we put a tax plan together, we're really prudent, responsible about it. We take the conservative numbers, we build buffer in.
All right.
Let's take our first year plan. We've got $500 million
and really
of extra
interesting stuff there, and I love the energy you're bringing to it. It's great. We wanted to hear from people all across New Zealand about what crash is worrying them the most. So research company Ipsos, who produces the Ipsos New Zealand Surveys Monitor, surveyed nearly 1,200 people on our behalf. One of them was a young waitress. Let's take a look.
I'm Sky Renz. I'm 23, I work in hospitality, and I live on Auckland's North Shore. My question is, do you think that the rich and wealthy should have any sort of responsibility when it comes to poverty and inequality? And if so, what would that look like?
Chris Hipkins, what do you say to Sky?
I say absolutely. We should all contribute our fair share of tax. It's one of the reasons why I don't believe that people like myself and Christopher need a tax cut right now. I'd rather be lifting children out of poverty. We've lifted 77,000 children out of poverty over the last 6 years, but we've got more work to do. I'm not going to rest until we've lifted all of the kids out of poverty in New Zealand.
When it comes to tax, capital gains tax, that's something that you could do and bring in. Is that something you would introduce in any form if you were Prime Minister after October 14?
No, I've been clear. We wouldn't introduce a capital gains tax or a wealth tax.
So absolutely no to any kind of capital gains tax and a wealth tax. And do you feel like you've got the pulse of the public on that one?
Yes, that's a no.
Very nice, thank you. Would you be prepared to pay a capital gains tax personally?
I wouldn't have any problem with it, but there isn't the degree of public support that we need, or the political support. A capital gains tax takes 10 years before it starts to generate significant revenue, so there's no point in one government introducing it and another government...
All right,
But Jessica, he's going to be in a coalition of chaos with Te Pāti Māori, the Greens, and with support from the gangs.
That's the first time we've heard that coalition of chaos tonight. Well done.
They want to bring a wealth tax in under the Green policy.
Well, just wait and see what Act in New Zealand First want to do under a national government.
That would be a disaster for New Zealand.
Chris,
but what we've got to do...
What
I say to Sky is help is on the way. Because actually under our tax plan, Sky, if she's a median individual income earner in New Zealand, would get $50 extra a fortnight. That goes a long way to helping her pay.
She is a waitress, so she's probably getting the $10 a week.
She's probably it probably helps her deal with her rent, deal with her actual fuel costs that she's dealing with, and food prices that she's seeing in supermarkets. And so that's the meaningful way by which you actually deliver help and support to working New Zealanders like Sky.
Is the tax system fair though? Doesn't Sky have a point?
Well, what's not fair is that people like Sky on lower middle incomes are not getting any tax relief. You know, that's the unfairness in our tax system.
Is it
they are
fair?
waking up every day, going to work, slogging their guts out, doing 1 or 2 jobs, and still can't get ahead.
If Sky's
and this has to be a country, to be honest, this has to be a country where the promise of New Zealand is if you work hard in the best country on earth, you deserve to get ahead.
If Sky's on the minimum wage,
you
get 25 cents an hour from National's tax cut. Under our government, under the Labor government, she's had nearly $7 an hour increase in the minimum wage. I think that's how you help people on low incomes to get ahead, rather than 25 cents an hour.
Right, so Chris Hipkins, what's your plan to grow the economy?
We've got to make sure that we're creating an economy that's growing wages and growing jobs. It means boosting our exports. It means making sure that we're being one of the cleanest, greenest economies in the world, because we make money off that clean, green image in New Zealand, and we have to continue to do that. We've got to make sure that we're keeping Kiwis in work. We've got one of the lowest unemployment rates that we've ever had, and that's because of our government's economic management.
50,000 more people on job seeker unemployment benefits.
One of the lowest unemployment rates in the world. I want to put to you instead, what's your plan to grow the economy?
Well, look, I want New Zealand to be one of the most advanced leading small countries on earth, period. And I think there's no reason why we can't do it.
So how will you do that?
So how do we do it? We make sure we've got a world-class education system. We make sure that we invest in infrastructure that's modern and reliable. We ensure that we actually embrace skills, technology and science.
Yep, really nice
set up our business.
But what's your plan?
No, well, they're the big 5 drivers of prosperity, because that's actually how you lift the wealth of this country and actually take everyone up and everyone forward. And those are the things that you have to work on. Strong international connections to the world. We don't get rich selling stuff to each other. We get rich by trading with 8 billion people in 185 other countries.
One final question to you both in this segment. In our Ipsos poll, one of the things that showed up was that younger people, and Māori in particular, the price of petrol is a really big thing for them. Can you and will you do anything about the price of petrol?
Well, what we've said is we're not going to do what Chris is doing, which is to increase fuel tax.
What will you do?
We're not going to increase fuel tax in our first term, because until we get inflation under control and sorted, which we need, which is the number one job. What that means is they're not getting what I think is 10 or 12 cents extra a litre thrown on top of them on their fuel. I want them to be able to keep more of their own money in their own pocket to navigate cost of living while we get inflation down.
A short response from you as well. What will you do?
What we're not going to do is what National's going to do.
What will you do?
They have said that they're going to government deal with emissions by hiking up the price
You're
of
going to
carbon.
increase fuel tax,
That could
Chris.
potentially increase the price of petrol by 40 cents a litre. That's going to make the fuel tax increase of 4 cents a litre that we're talking about pale by insignificance. I acknowledge that we have to increase the price of petrol modestly, 4 cents a litre a year we're talking about, in order to invest in the roads that we need as a country. Someone has to pay for them. Christopher thinks that somehow international investors are going to come and give us money for our roads and not want a return from that. We still have to pay that money back.
All right, we're going to talk about more of this later. This is really good fun for me. I hope you're enjoying it as well. Plenty to chew over there. Next, we're going to focus on leadership. Chris Hipkins, are you an inspirational leader? And Chris Luxon, you run a company. Can you run the country? We'll find out after the break. Welcome back. In the age of pandemics and climate disasters, we've been made aware of just how essential leadership and trust are when critical decisions have to be made. So this is a big topic for both of you. Chris Hipkins, first of all, I want to ask you a question. With Christopher Luxon, what's something that you admire about his leadership?
Well, first of all, I mean, I really admire Chris's commitment to his family, and he's, and I do genuinely respect that. I think, being in politics is hard on families, and I respect the fact that Chris continues to make time for his family. I think generally being leader of the opposition is a tough job. Being Prime Minister is a tough job too. And so people deserve credit for taking on those roles.
How do you respond to that question? What leadership quality do you admire in Chris Hipkins?
Well, I really respect Chris for taking on the job of Prime Minister. It's an incredibly tough job. It requires huge amounts of resilience, and it's also one of the most extreme jobs in the country that you can do. And so I admire and respect anyone that can do that. And I also really admire the way that he talked about his family up front when he took on this job, and I respect the way he went about it, and I respect the great dad that he is too.
Chris Luxon, do you trust Chris Hipkins?
Well, look, I mean, I think I'm sure he's got good intentions, but it's just we disagree on how to take the country forward. And so it doesn't make Chris a bad person. It's just that we disagree on what's the best recipe for New Zealand.
Chris Hipkins, do you trust Chris Luxon?
I'd probably echo that sentiment. I disagree with with his prescription for New Zealand. And I don't trust him to be upfront and honest with New Zealanders about the implications of his policies, because if he was, he'd be releasing his secret costings.
Very interesting point. Nice segue into that, actually. It was good. Who is the leader that you've worked under that you respect the most?
Oh, look, I respect many leaders that I've worked with. Jacinda Ardern is a good, close friend, and I respect her enormously. I respected Helen Clark as a leader as well.
Who would you put at the top there? Who do you most admire as a leader?
I'll get into trouble with both of them if you ask me to pick one.
It's all right. It's all right. There's only a few 100,000 people watching. Don't worry. I'll put the question then to you, Chris Luxon. Who's the best leader you've ever worked under?
Oh, look, actually, there's been a number of great leaders that I've had the privilege of working with and for over my career. And I think you actually take good bits out of each leader that you work with.
Give us an example of a bit.
Oh, well, like I can think of, different leaders I've had in my business world where, the way that someone went about something, I learnt a lot from them in that period of time, and it helped build my own leadership skills. I think what I've learnt is, I've got real-world leadership experience. I spent my whole life actually solving problems and getting things done and turning things around. And to be honest, I actually think that's what New Zealand needs right now, is actually that real-world leadership experience. We've got a great country. We're just not realising all of our potential, and yet we can if we get it done right.
Chris Hipkins, in the Ipsos survey, one of the questions that people wanted to know is how can they trust you to carry out your promises? What do you say to those people?
We've had an incredibly disruptive 6 years, and I'm pretty open about the fact that we haven't fulfilled all of the commitments that we have made. We've had to deal with a few other things along the way. I made a commitment when I became Prime Minister that all of the commitments I put before the electorate this election will be things that I'm absolutely confident we can deliver on in the next 3 years. We have had some big commitments over the past 6 years. We made a lot of progress, but there's been plenty of disruptions along the way.
Chris, like some people at home think, politicians can't trust a lot of you. What do you say to them about fulfilling your promises?
Well, look, I'm just someone, I honestly come from outside of politics. I'm not a career politician like Chris or many others that are there. I've come to this job because I choose to do the job, because I want to do the job, because I think the country can be so much better than this. I'm used to getting things done and getting things sorted and turning organisations around. I think that's what New Zealand needs. And so for me, I am a very outcomes, results-driven person because I know that's what makes the difference. I do believe in building great and strong teams to help me do that job. I think my success has come from doing exactly that.
In politics, though, do you think you have to deliver things or make promises that you can't deliver on?
Well, look, I think you need to be straight up with the New Zealand people and say exactly what you can commit to. It's always a dynamic environment, and when it changes, you need to be very straight up with them as well. But actually, where we are today as a country is, people are sick of the talk. They actually want delivery. They want things to get done.
One of the things that when you think about leadership over the last few years, COVID comes to mind.
Yeah.
In hindsight, was Labor right to lock down for as long as it did?
Look, I've been quite public about it. I felt the actual first part of the COVID response was actually very well managed by both Jacinda Ardern and Chris in the ministerial capacity. But after that period of time, we were way too slow to come out. I actually don't think it was well managed.
So how would you manage that decision, making calls about the balance between lives and livelihoods?
Well, there was a point when we actually, as I said, the first year I think was managed incredibly well. But after that, it was way too slow. Other countries came out of it much quicker from us, got the jump on us, and as a result, that's what we needed to do as well.
Chris Hipkins, you obviously carried the big weight of COVID on your shoulders during that time. What impact did that have on you?
It was an enormous responsibility, and I never took it lightly. Other countries had the luxury of, well, I wouldn't call it the luxury, actually the hardship of being able to come out of COVID restrictions faster than New Zealand because they had already had COVID sweep through their communities. We had a community that was unvaccinated, that hadn't been exposed to COVID-19 before. We needed to tread carefully there. We needed to protect our vulnerable, and I think New Zealand as a whole should be incredibly proud of our COVID-19 response. We had one of the lowest death rates from COVID-19 in the world. And with the benefit of hindsight, there's many things that you would do differently. But you don't get the benefit of hindsight when you're in government. You have to make decisions, often based on limited information, and you have to try and make good judgments.
As all Prime Minister knows, being in that role, there's often things that are unpredictable. I want to put a hypothetical to you now around China. China is obviously a $40 billion two-way trading partner for us. If China was to invade Taiwan, what would you do?
Look, I don't think that we should talk about hypotheticals like that in a situation
I'm talking about leadership.
Which is so serious.
I'm asking for your judgment.
And is something that the whole world should do everything we can to avoid. Yep. I don't think armed conflict in the Taiwan Strait is going to be good for the world, and New Zealand should use all of its diplomatic might, whatever that might be, to try and avoid that situation. I don't think we should speculate on hypotheticals like that because actually it could be damaging for our international relationships and it could be damaging for world politics.
And Jessica, I just say,
it's such a tricky situation, isn't it? It's such a balance.
But what I'd say is I think this is where there has been bipartisanship under successive governments, under successive parties, is our approach to foreign affairs and to our relationships with our key partners has actually been very consistent between governments. And I'm with Chris. I think it's not helpful having a speculative hypothetical like that.
How do you rate yourself as a negotiator?
Well, look, I mean, obviously my background in the business world has meant that I've done a lot of negotiations, whether it's been, involved in mergers and acquisitions and
Has
all
that
that sorts of
prepared you
things.
for managing Winston Peters and David Seymour?
Well, I tell you, what it has prepared me for is, I think, to give me some good leadership experience that actually is very useful to New Zealand at this time in our history and where we find ourselves.
With all due respect, Chris, Winston Peters and David Seymour would be running circles around you. I mean, Winston Peters brings chaos wherever he goes.
Yep.
I've ruled out working with Winston Peters because stable government does not come from working with Winston Peters.
And what
What
I'd say to you is, I mean, the original coalition of chaos is just imagine this. I mean, Labor has had an absolute majority and has not got things done in that term. Imagine when you throw Te Pāti Māori, the Greens, and I'd argue got the support of the gangs there as well, actually into that mix. That's not
great. Do you want to respond to that?
That's not great.
That is absolutely ridiculous. But yes, it's been a challenging 3 years. For the first nearly 2 years of this parliamentary term, we were leading the country through a global pandemic. That did make it harder to get things done. I've said it when I took over as Prime Minister in January, we needed to get back to focusing on the bread and butter issues, the basics that New Zealanders want us focused on. And I believe that we have been making progress on those things.
Chris,
we're getting inflation back down. We're getting the economy growing again. We've kept New Zealanders in jobs through some of the most difficult economic circumstances we've faced in a generation.
Why are you 11 points behind when it comes to the polls?
Oh, look, I acknowledge it's been a difficult time for New Zealanders, but I think the more New Zealanders see the risk of National's approach with their unfunded tax cuts, with the huge cuts they want to make to government spending.
All right.
I think that'll change.
I want to ask you both very quickly here, a little bit of self-reflection. What's the quality you most deplore in yourself? I'll start with you, Chris Luxon.
Oh, look, I'm pretty hard charging and pretty determined.
And very quickly, Chris Hipkins.
I probably need to delegate more.
Okay, wow, very diplomatic answers from both of you. So basically what we're hearing here is, trust me, I know what I'm doing, from both of them. But how will our next Prime Minister deliver on personal safety for all New Zealanders? We'll talk crime after the break. Welcome again to the First Leaders Debate. Getting tough on crime and keeping Kiwis safe is a major concern for voting Kiwis. Take a look at what happened just yesterday. A 16-year-old has been arrested and charged with murder after an attack at an Albany bus station. This happened in the middle of the day as Aucklanders were getting the bus. Chris Hipkins, we're so used to treating New Zealand and thinking of New Zealand as a safe country. Do you know what it feels like to be unsafe?
I've spoken to many of the victims of the recent offending that we have seen. It's not acceptable. They shouldn't be in that situation. Just over a year ago, when I became Minister of Police, I made it clear I wasn't happy with our approach at that time, and I set about changing them. Since that time, police launched Operation Cobalt, for example. More than 50,000 charges have been made against gang members because I think that escalation in gang activity isn't acceptable.
And
we put in place. I just want to mention one more.
And I want to ask you a more of a personal question. Yeah. Do you know what it feels like to wander around and feel unsafe?
Well, clearly not at the moment, but I do acknowledge that there are more New Zealanders feeling unsafe, and we do need to do something about that.
You don't know what it feels like to feel unsafe.
It's just that you've had 6 years to do something about it. In what position are you to do something about it?
The circuit breaker initiative, for example, that we have put in place, means that 3/4 of the young offenders that have been referred to that haven't gone on to re-offend. I want to turn their lives around so that they're not on the cycle of criminal offending that they are at the moment. We've got to turn these kids' lives around. If we want less crime, we've got to have less criminals in the first place. We've got to break that cycle.
No, I want to put the personal question to you first. Do you know what it feels like to feel unsafe?
Look, I've walked through downtown Auckland late at night and it doesn't feel safe, if I'm really honest with you. And that's the reality for many of your viewers watching tonight. You know, they are saying, I do not feel safe in my home, in my business or my community. And the real answer is Labor's been soft on crime. And the reality is they've had one goal only, and it's a 30% reduction in the prison population. And that would be fine, and all of us watching would say that would be wonderful if there'd been a 30% reduction in crime. But there hasn't been. There's been a 30% increase in violent crime, a 100% increase in retail crime. We've got 9 gang members now for every 10 police officers, and we have a ram raid every twice a day in this country.
Are you soft on crime?
And I'll just say to you, Jessica, that's something we do not have to accept in this country, because the problem is this. Every 6 months it gets more frequent, more gratuitous, more violent, and we start to say that's how it is.
Great.
And I think we get to choose that it's not how we want it to be.
What you didn't hear in there anywhere was a solution. A slogan is not a solution.
Let me give you a solution.
We've put 1,800 extra police on the beat. We've put in place a circuit breaker initiative for young offenders to stop the cycle.
Okay, give me a couple of your solutions.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to actually back the police and tackle the gangs. That means ban gang
funding last time you were in government.
Well, mate, you actually gave them funding. You gave them $2.7 million to do meth rehab. I don't think that's a good idea.
I think you're both talking about different things there.
What I'd say to you is, with respect to our plan of tackling gangs, we're going to make sure you ban gang patches in public places. We give police dispersal and powers to break them up from planning criminal activity. We get tough on the illegal guns that they have, and we make being a gang member an aggravating sentence in sentencing. We have serious young offender consequences for serious young offenders, and we make sure we actually have proper, stronger sentencing and limit the discounts that judges are giving.
We had a situation in Oporiki and Whakatane where effectively a gang funeral took over the town. Is that good enough?
No, it's not. And that's why we have changed the law to make it possible for the police to go after the gang convoys. The law has only just been changed.
But Chris, you've had 6 years.
And the police have already used the law change that we put in place. And I was the Minister of Police when we sponsored that bill. They used that law change that I helped to shepherd through in that very case that you have just mentioned.
That's exactly right, Jess. I mean, we had a town in Opotiki shut down because the gangs came to town. The bus services couldn't be used, the school got shut down, and why are the rights of New Zealanders being subsumed to those of gangs?
We know the problem. What I want to do is talk about solutions. I keep coming back to that. One of the ideas that Winston Peters has put up is to have a prison just for gang members. It means that they're not recruited. It means that, I guess, a bit of a solution to the gang problem. What do you think about that?
Well, I like our ideas. We're going to tackle the gangs by actually saying this is not a lifestyle we want anyone to go down. Gang membership
gang membership
Doesn't
kind of make sense, though?
Gang membership's up 70%. We have 9 gang members for every 10 police officers in this country. So what do we need to do? We need to say, look, we do not want you wearing your gang patches in public places. Why? Because actually to wear a patch, you've actually got to demonstrate some violence and some intimidation. We're going to make sure we can give the police powers to break up gang members who are being intimidating in public places, make sure they can't plan criminal activity, and importantly, go after the illegal guns that they're driving so much of this violent crime with.
Let's switch to ram raids now, because it's something that really has been on the news over and over again. You guys are both dads. Is it acceptable that these 7-year-olds, these 10-year-olds, 11 and 12-year-olds, is that shocking, Chris Hipkins?
It's absolutely shocking, and it's the reason we've got to break that cycle of offending. When I became the Minister of Police, I asked for a list of the kids who were involved in repeat ram raiding. There were about 96 of them across the country, and I can tell you one thing, 90% of those kids live in a household with someone who's been in prison. This is a cycle of crime. We've got to break that cycle.
And
we
it's
put in
still
place
in huge numbers,
we put in place the Circuit Breaker Initiative because we've got to break that
But
cycle.
there's still
3/4 of the kids who have gone into the Circuit Breaker Initiative haven't gone on to reoffend. Christopher's solution is
Then
boot
why
camps.
the numbers look so
80%
bad?
of the kids that have gone to boot camps, when National tried them last time, went on and reoffended.
Let me talk about the boot camps, because
Great.
I actually think for 15 to 17-year-old serious young offenders to be able to give a judge an option to say you're going to a boot camp for 12 months is a good thing. Why? Because actually our military leaders are our best leaders and mentors. I tell you, they're much better than the Oranga Tamariki supervisors we saw encouraging those vulnerable young people to fight. And we're going to put community organisations embedded with them from day one.
So what's
you can work
an
on
interesting
literacy,
point?
you can work on addiction, you can work
We
on new
spoke to an expert, Chris Polishek, and he was the one that ran John Key's boot camps, right? He came back to us and said, look, the reoffending rate was 83%. That's about what you get in residential care. They don't work, do they?
I think we can make them better. We've taken them based off a program that is very successful called the LSV program, which actually has some really good core principles to it. We're making it longer, and we're actually putting our community organisations embedded in there from day one. And when
different evidence
and when the young
to show
person
that
comes
they work
out of
now.
that, when the young person comes out of it, they stick with the community
Are you
organisation
saying
to
they
change
work
their
now
lives
when
and
they
change the
didn't
direction of where it's
before?
going. I think we can make them work incredibly well because we need powerful, targeted interventions in these young people's lives.
Boot camps
I'm not prepared to write them off. I'm not prepared to write them off. We've got to teach them rights and responsibilities. We have to teach them discipline.
Jessica, boot camps have a near 80% failure rate. The fast track initiative that I just talked about to break the cycle has a near 80% success rate. That's the sort of initiative we've got to back because it turns these kids' lives around.
If you believe in it so strongly, why haven't you implemented it?
I want to turn to some quick fire now. Chris Hipkins, first of all, have you ever had a speeding ticket?
Yes.
Yes.
Is now the time for New Zealand to become a republic?
No.
No.
Should we have a new flag?
I voted yes.
Laser Kiwi?
Not that one.
New flag?
I supported a new flag, yep.
Compulsory te reo in schools?
Universal.
No, but we need more te reo teachers.
What do you mean by universal?
I think every kid should have the option of learning te reo Māori.
Okay, cell phones in schools, banning them.
Schools have the ability to do that now.
Yep, ban them so they can focus on learning.
Have you been to a church service this year?
Yes, many of them.
Yes, I have.
All as part of campaigning?
Yeah, more or less.
All part of campaigning?
I think so, yes. I've been to a lot of temples. I'll put it this way, I've been to a lot more temples than churches per se.
Should we continue to ban nuclear-powered ships from our waters?
Yes.
Yes.
Should cannabis be decriminalised?
No.
No.
Should vapes be prescription only?
No.
No, not at this stage, but I am interested to see what else we need to do to get it under control.
Ooh, just in the quick fire. Is the health system broken?
No.
Yes.
Yeah, you're really getting the hang of this. We're going to talk more about health soon. Interesting stuff. After the break, we take a hard look at what's next in our health system, a big concern for many New Zealanders. With the First Leaders debate with Labour's Chris Hipkins and National's Chris Luxon. So let's get straight into it. And I want a guarantee from both of you that you will not make any cuts to health or education if you are Prime Minister. Chris Luxon.
I've said it very strongly. We're going to increase spending on health and education each and every year under my government. But I just would put to you that last answer when Chris says there is no crisis in healthcare, I think that's quite outrageous.
do you guarantee no cuts to health and education?
I can absolutely guarantee that, and our track record speaks for that. The National Party said last time they came into government they weren't going to cut health and education spending, and we saw what happened
right,
there.
so for people
those
sitting
services
at home,
were run down to the bone.
guarantee that both of you will not make any cuts to health or education. Set in stone.
Absolutely.
We will increase funding every year.
Okay. Chris Hipkins, Australia is stealing all of our health professionals, or a big chunk of them at the moment. What will you do to entice them to stay here in New Zealand?
First of all, we're going to pay them more. When we became the government, the graduate nurse coming out of university or out of Polytech and starting their career would be earning $49,000. They're now earning $75,000. A nurse at the top end of the salary scale when we came into government was earning $66,000. They're now earning $106,000. Christopher Luxon calls this wasteful spending. I think it's an investment in our people.
How would you
just
get
for the
them
record,
to stay
the
here?
wasteful spending is 200 comm staff in Health New Zealand. That should actually be 200 extra nurses that we've
What's
just
the
put in the
exception you
front
take
line.
of comm staff?
Well, I'd sooner have 200 nurses at the front line than I would be having 200 comm staff sitting in the back office functions of the Ministry of Health New Zealand.
So how will you attract... I want to put that question to you. So how will you attract health professionals to stay here in
well,
New
here's the
Zealand?
problem, right? There is 360 New Zealand students studying medicine in Australian universities today. Now, they've left New Zealand because they couldn't get places in our medical schools here. They've gone to Australia, and it's likely that they'll build their professional practice over there. What I want to do is expand the number of places for our doctors at both Otago and Auckland by 100 places, open up a third medical school at the University of Waikato, which will be a graduate program, and it actually will be emphasise training in regional New Zealand. And the research says if you get your placement in regional New Zealand hospitals, you'll be the local
These
GP.
are long-term things, though.
No, we can
Would
start-
you pay them more?
Well, I'm very supportive of that as part of increasing funding for education and health. That's something that we can do. But what I'd say to you is we have to home grow our workforce, and part of that is training more doctors
We hear you on
and
that
retaining more
Chris
nurses.
Hipkins, with GPs, getting an appointment is really tough. When was the last time you went to a GP, and how long did it take you?
Relatively recently, and I was able to get an appointment relatively speedily, but I acknowledge it's very different around the country. In some places, it's very hard to get a GP's appointment.
And is that because you're Prime Minister, or...?
No, because it wasn't for me. It was actually for one of my kids. But I acknowledge in some parts of the country, it can be quite hard to get a GP appointment at the moment. We need to train more doctors. Christopher's right on that.
Do you need to pay them more?
Christopher's right on the fact that we need to train more doctors, but building a whole new medical school is going to take too long. By increasing
Can you answer my question,
the
though? Will you
places at
pay
our existing
GPs
medical schools, we
more?
can do it faster.
Will you pay GPs more?
Oh, look, undoubtedly, there's always room to pay people more.
When was
Well,
the last time you went to the doctor?
Sorry, I just think the sad thing
I
is,
just want to
6
get
years
this.
ago, he could have started and opened up and trained more doctors. And it would be great to have those doctors available today. So the next best time to start training more doctors is tomorrow, because wouldn't it be great if we'd actually had a third medical school in place today?
Cool, and you've made that point. So my question to you is, when was the last time you went to a GP, and do you get how hard it is to get
Yeah, I
in?
do. I mean, it can take up to a week to get a physical appointment. I tend to actually do Zooms with my GP. I did one maybe about 6 weeks ago.
Mental health, I'll come to you first.
Mm-hmm.
$1.9 billion into mental health. What will you do, and what will you spend to make a meaningful difference in this space?
Well, the first thing is, I understand mental health a bit. My mum is a psychotherapist, counsellor, and I've, sort of grown up in and around that world. What I want to do is have a dedicated Minister of Mental Health, so it's not treated as a second-class health issue. It's right there at the cabinet table. The second thing we need to do is have targets, like we're going to have across the whole of the healthcare sector, but
how
across
do
public
targets
service.
work if you don't have the workforce
hear
in the
me
health
out. Hear me
sector
out.
to
Yep. So
deal with it?
then what we've got to do is make sure that we actually are measuring people's access and speed to access, because we've made good progress on the stigma around mental health, but we've got a lot more work
There's
to
no
do about
point having
access.
targets if you don't have the workforce.
And then the last bit I'd say to you is we need to...
So will you address that, or are you just moving on?
Well, no, we need to address the workforce. We're short psychologists, we're short psychiatrists, but one of the things that we can do is actually power up our community organisations in a much better way.
Cool.
So I'd like to take an organisation like, say, Gumboot Friday.
Great.
Does 19,000 counselling sessions.
And we hear you on that one. So, Chris Hipkins,
get money
with
to
mental
them.
health, why are we still waiting? I was there when you announced $1.9 billion in spending there. It hasn't seemed to have made a meaningful difference.
We're building a new mental health system from the ground up. We've been putting counsellors in schools. We've got programs like Mana Ake in schools targeting our young people that are delivering real outcomes. Access and choice, which means that you can go to your GP and you can get a referral to a free mental health counselling session. That's delivered over 1 million counselling sessions now. It took a while to get that up and running and to get that established.
Too long, do you think?
Of course it took too long, but you can't build something out of nothing. It takes time to build these systems.
Another thing that you've talked about a bit during the election campaign when you've been out on the road has been the issue of dental. Now, it's a big issue and Labor is promising free dental care for those under 30. Here's a clinical director for hospital and specialist dentistry.
My name's Hugh Tringrove. I'm a hospital dentist in Auckland. I think the oral health situation in New Zealand is appalling and we need to do something. We know that sugar is a key element in the development of tooth decay. We also know it's a key risk factor in medical conditions such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease and cancer, some cancers. My question to the parties and to the leaders is, what are you going to do about the sugar epidemic in our communities?
So we're hearing from an expert there. What about a sugar tax? What about banning fizzy drinks?
Well, look, I mean, we can look into that, but I think education is the way in which we actually help people navigate and make smarter choices.
You don't sound very enthused.
Well, I just say to you, the dental policy to me is quite an interesting one because all parties would like to expand dental care. There's no doubt about it. Actually, Jacinda Ardern and Chris Hipkins said some time ago they'd love to do it too.
I do want to talk about sugar, though. Would you ban sugar in schools? Labor did it.
Well, I don't think I would. I mean, I think I'd work harder on education to make sure we give people healthier choices in school lunch programs. I'd make sure that we work harder on education to make healthier choices about food that people are purchasing.
Chris Hipkins, would you bring that back?
I've banned fizzy drinks in primary schools already, and I think that they should be banned in secondary schools as well, and we will do that if re-elected.
Do we need to look at things like a sugar tax, like banning fizzy drinks? Because at the moment, your solution is to spend $390 million on dental care at the other end.
Sugar's not the only thing that causes tooth decay. We know that tooth decay starts to really accelerate for people in their 20s. That's why I've targeted the under 30s for the first stage of rolling out free dental care, because we know that if we can get people in that age cohort, it's affordable for a fraction of the cost of the tax cuts.
And doesn't he have a point there? But isn't it just good economics? You pump $1 in to dental care, you get $1.60 back.
Yeah, sure. But like in our healthcare system at the moment, the reality is we would all love to do it, but we have higher priorities in our healthcare system right now.
You've indicated that tax cuts for you and me is more important.
But what I'd say to you is, for Chris in particular, you know, he's actually promised in 2020 that they put 20 mobile dental clinics out across the country. They haven't delivered one. So I'm a little bit sceptical, 30 days out from an election, that after 6 years in power he's decided that he can do something in dental.
An expert in dentistry is saying sugar is a big problem and yet neither of you are prepared to address that.
Well, the reality is that our healthcare system is in crisis and we have some major challenges. We are 1,700 doctors short. We're 4,500 nurses short. We would all love to expand free dental. That would be what every political party wishes to do, but there are other priorities.
And we do know that problem.
Yep.
Chris Luxon, do you think that Māori and Pacific patients should be prioritised over other patients with similar conditions? Māori die 7 years earlier.
Yes, and we have to work to improve every health outcome for Māori and for non-Māori.
Should they be prioritised?
But actually the prioritisation and the delivery of public services should always be on the basis of need, not ethnicity.
So no. Chris Hipkins.
At the moment, Māori and Pacific New Zealanders wait for longer for healthcare than other New Zealanders. The fact that the health system is committed to doing something about that is a good thing. Māori and Pacific New Zealanders should not be discriminated against by the health system, which there is clear evidence they have been in the past.
Why do you think that there is that gap and why haven't you done more to address that?
We are addressing that, and unfortunately other political parties are choosing to use that for race-baiting politics.
How do you respond to that?
Well, that's just not right. I mean, we have a series of public services we make available to all 5.2 million people across New Zealand. You've got to always come through the lens of people's needs, not their ethnicities. That's the deal here in New Zealand. So
why should Māori and Pacific people with the same need wait longer than non-Māori and Pacific New Zealanders? Because that's what's happening right now.
Yeah, but Chris, that's not the way to deal with it. You come through the need lens. If someone's waiting longer, then
they
you actually
have the
deal with
same
that
need
issue.
and they're waiting longer. Why is that fair?
You come through the needs lens and you identify the relative priority of people based off length of time they've been on the list, where they've come, how far they have to.
One question I want to put to both of you on this then. Isn't the health authority a good example of co-governance?
No. Look, I mean, we're going to scrap the Māori Health Authority. Why? Because it's creating another bureaucracy.
What do you
Why? Because
say to
every single health outcome has gone backwards under Chris's government in 6 years. Not one has improved for Māori or for non-Māori.
And doesn't he have a point?
The National Party used to support a by-Māori, for-Māori approach when it came to things like health and education, and that's exactly what the Māori Health Authority will do.
No, you're creating two systems, and we have one system.
That's just not true.
No.
It's allowing Māori to have control over their own healthcare. There's nothing to be afraid of for non-Māori if we do that.
I'm not afraid of anything, Chris. Chris, what I am wanting to deliver is better outcomes for Māori and for non-Māori.
And I do want to talk more about this after the break. That sets us up really well for talking about co-governance. What does it mean to you? We're going to find out. This is the First Leaders Debate, and we hope tonight's discussion is helping you decide who you would like to lead our country. So the topic I want to talk about now is co-governance. So Chris Luxon, I got through most of the night before that, but Chris Luxon, what does co-governance mean to you? What is it?
Well, look, we had quite a good understanding of the word co-governance in our last government. It was actually essentially in the context of treaty settlements, the local management of local natural resources, led by local iwi in conjunction often with district or regional councils, and that worked exceptionally well and will continue to do that. The issue that has happened is the word co-governance has been taken out of that context and put into the delivery of national public services and goods. And what we're saying very clearly is, look, we don't support co-governance of public services. We think we are one country, we have one system of public services, they're made available to people on the basis of their needs, and that we're all one person, one vote, equal citizenship. So on the area of public services, the problem is that the word's been taken out of one context.
I just want to talk
and
about
this government hasn't explained what it means by it or where it's going with it.
What does it mean to you?
Ultimately, co-governance means shared decision-making, and in fact, most of the co-governance arrangements that we have in place have been through treaty settlements, and it is over issues like natural resources, and I think they've been very successful.
I mean, you say shared decision-making, that doesn't exactly sound scary. Why are people so nervous about co-governance?
I don't think they should be. I think we're strongest...
Have you failed then in your job to explain what it is?
I think we're strongest as a country when we're working together, and I think the strengthening of the relationship between the government and Māori is a positive thing for New Zealand. I think working together to resolve issues like historical, educational disadvantage, historical disadvantage within the health system, I think government working together with Māori to address those issues is a positive thing.
Chris Luxon, Chris Finlayson, another Chris to add into the mix, calls it co-management, and Rob Campbell says it's about sharing responsibility for governance. Doesn't that sound pretty familiar? Aren't we doing this all the time already?
And we will continue to do that but it's bounded in the context of the management of local natural resources. And there are some great examples. Just here in Auckland, think about the volcanic cones that have been well managed in that context and that environment. That's great. But what we don't need is two systems creating two separate bureaucracies, like the Māori Health Authority, for example.
We want one health department. Why do you think you know better about Māori health than Māori do?
I want to be able to deliver those services through Māori health organisations. I've seen a few of them across the country.
That's what the Māori Health Authority will do.
They do it locally. They're in touch with their local communities. That's what we should do. If they want to have charter schools, we should have charter schools and innovation within the one education system. We can have innovation and delivery around one healthcare system.
Do you agree that by Māori, for Māori is the best system?
It's a great solution, and we invented it in the National Party, and we're very proud and will continue to do it.
And that's exactly what the Māori Health Authority is.
But we're not going to create two separate national systems for the delivery of public services.
Why not with health?
Because actually it just creates more bureaucracy.
But nothing's
not
working.
A single
Things
outcome.
Aren't working at the moment.
Correct.
So why don't we try something
After
new?
6 years of this government, I couldn't agree more. Everything is broken.
Yeah, great. So we know that, and I think we can agree there are problems. But why not try something new?
Well, what we want to try and what we want to turbocharge and really put volume to is actually using community organisations to deliver those services, but within the context of a single system.
Chris,
Having a Māori Health Authority isn't having two separate systems. It's no different to having Māori health providers and non-Māori health providers. So Christopher said that he's in favour of having Māori health providers, but he doesn't think that there should be a Māori Health Authority.
You don't need two separate systems. You don't need two separate systems.
But they're not. What's the difference?
Have one system, have a delivery mechanism that involves Māori organisations to get to the community to deliver those services.
So you don't think we should have Māori health providers?
I do think we should, but we don't need two separate systems of a separate Māori health authority.
How is that not a separate system if we're having Māori health providers?
Well, what I'd say to you is we can have the coherence of one system of delivery of public services. We make them available to people on the basis of their needs, and we use community organisations to actually get to those communities and those identities and those and people across the country and deploy those services.
Having a Māori health authority doesn't mean we have two systems.
Are you worried about how much it would cost to wind that back? Wouldn't that just be a whole lot of wasteful spending?
A year into it, the report has come out already to say it hasn't been working well. There hasn't been good governance, there hasn't been a good plan, it's not delivering. It's like everything with this government, it's not delivering.
I mean, it's only just beginning, but what do you say to that?
That's exactly what my response is. It's only just beginning. Many organisations have teething troubles when they're first established. I think when we're dealing with systemic issues in our health system that mean that Māori haven't had access to the same healthcare as non-Māori, it is going to take some time to build the capacity of the health system to deal with that properly. But I'm absolutely committed to doing that because I don't think it's fair to consign Māori to poorer health outcomes than non-Māori New Zealanders.
Every outcome's gone backwards, Chris, under your government. Every single health outcome for Māori or non-Māori. You can't have that. Well,
no, actually, that's not true. In fact, we're on smoking. Let's take smoking, for example. That is a health issue. We're on track to be
one of the childhood immunisation
some of the lowest smoking rates in the world.
Okay.
Well, and actually, childhood immunisation is not helped by the anti-vax movement, which Act in New Zealand First seem to be propping up.
Chris Luxon, if you are Prime Minister, don't you have a responsibility to govern for everyone? And
Absolutely.
What will you offer Māori?
Well, I want to strengthen the partnership with Māori, and that's why over the last year I've actually been meeting quietly with different iwi leaders up and down this country. And actually there's a lot that we have in common. They want to solve and improve the welfare, the health and well-being of their people locally. And that's actually what we believe in. It's a fundamental difference between Chris and my parties. We believe in something called localism and devolution, that we actually partner with local people on the ground to deal with the problem.
Well,
it doesn't mean you go build massive centralisation and control bureaucracies like Chris wants to do. He's done it. Let's be clear. He took 16 polytechnics from regional New Zealand, smashed them in together to create one big polytechnic.
And you supported that as the chair of the Prime Minister's Business Advisory Council. You said you supported it.
Not the way that you've implemented it at all. It's been terrible. He took 20 DHBs as imperfect as they were, spent all his time restructuring that, and we've got worse outcomes. He's taken 67 district councils, 3 waters, putting them into 10 mega co-governed entities. That's what he believes. He believes in centralisation.
I want to turn to quickfire now, and we'll go first with Chris Luxon this time, and you did so well with the last time. Let's try and do it again. Bilingual road signs and for public buildings, yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Should New Zealand formally change its name to Aotearoa?
No.
I'm not promoting it, but I have no problem with it.
Right.
If we do, it should be by referendum.
Would you propose a referendum?
No, I don't think there's a need or enough groundswell to actually put that on a referendum.
And what are you putting that on, just from what you're hearing?
Just in terms of what you see in terms of public.
Okay. Yep. Should New Zealand provide free lunches to all students in state schools?
Yeah, I think we should. We've got to make it more effective and target it and deliver it better.
To all students?
No, I think we should target it to those students that we're currently targeting it to.
4-year term?
I personally have a lot of appetite for that because I think you'd throw governments out after 4 years rather than...
As a political reporter, I don't have appetite for that 4-year term.
Yes, I believe in a 4-year term.
Favourite beach?
Onatangi Beach, Waiheke.
Favourite beach?
Raumati South in Wellington.
So interesting. Personally, would you be happy to pay a wealth tax?
No, I think it would be a wrecking ball through the economy.
I don't think a wealth tax is the way to go.
Should transgender people be allowed to compete in sport?
That's a decision for the sporting bodies.
Decision for the sporting bodies.
Favourite book?
The Inner Mind of Tennis is what I'm sort of reading at the moment.
Yeah. To be honest, I don't get to read much fiction or non-fiction.
All right, tax for vacant houses, yes or no?
No.
No.
And how old were you when you bought your first home?
24.
Yeah, it would have been about the same.
Okay, nice segue there. So both of you are proud homeowners. How are you going to make that dream a reality for more New Zealanders? We'll be back to talk housing after the break. Welcome back. 1 in 3 Kiwi households are renters. 1 in 3. It's a sobering statistic for a country whose national identity has been historically tied with home ownership. 62-year-old Lindsay Eddy from Christchurch summed it up with an Ipsos question that I want to put to both of you now. How are you going to bring housing down to an affordable price? Chris Hipkins, what do you say to Lindsay?
We need to build more houses. We need to build our way out of the housing crisis that we've got at the moment. We're currently building around 40,000 houses a year. The private sector is currently building around 40,000 houses a year. And we've built 12,000, or 13,000 I should say, new state houses and public house rentals. We've got to keep up the momentum in that area. Building our way out of the housing crisis is how we give Kiwis a step up onto the the property ladder.
Do you feel like you've got a good track record when it comes to housing? Kiwi Build is not something Labor traditionally wants to talk about these days.
Kiwi Build was an unrealistic promise, and I've been really clear about that. I've refocused the government's effort into making sure that we are building more public houses, so that's more affordable rental accommodation. And my priority is first home buyers.
When will housing be at a more affordable level?
Well, when we've got to keep up the momentum with building more houses. I'll tell you what will push up the price of houses, allowing foreign buyers back into the market, because that's what it did last time.
When will you promise to make housing more affordable for people?
Well, firstly, I'd say, look, Labor's been an abject failure on housing, whether it's ownership, whether it's rental, whether it's state houses, right? There's been a lack of supply in all those three sectors, and they're all connected together. What we have to do is we have to increase supply and build more houses.
So you agree on that?
We agree on that. The way we go about delivering that end will be different. What we're saying is we're going to say to councils, you are going to rezone 30 years worth of housing growth tomorrow, and then we know where that development is taking place. Secondly, we're going to give developers new funding and financing tools so they can get the infrastructure into those new developments, and even use things like targeted rates so people sitting in the city or town don't end up subsidising new developments. And finally, we're going to get councils to be incented to grow, because we're going to give them $25,000 to spend as they see fit for every house they build over a 5-year average.
Chris,
that's what we've got to do to unlock it.
So many people are renting. Is that okay?
No, we need to be a nation of homeowners, not a nation of renters. Christopher Luxon's priority right at the moment is to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on tax breaks for landlords. I want to make sure that we're supporting Kiwis into buying their first home. That's why we've been focused on building more homes. It's why we've been focused on building the infrastructure that's been so badly run down. And I tell you, the other thing that we won't be doing is selling off state houses like the last National Government did. If they had built state houses at the same rate we're building them now, we wouldn't have a state house waiting list.
Well, actually, both of you are promising to build 1,000 new state houses, so that's another area you agree on, Chris Luxon.
Yeah, look, I mean, we agree with the government's budget tracker that they announced in the budget in May 2023. We're going to use a better mix, I think, of community housing providers, people like the Salvation Army, Māori Property Trust and others, to get more houses built in the state housing piece. But the bit I do want to address, which Chris raised, is actually the private rental market. You know, the reality is, by extending the Bright Line test, unwinding interest deductibility, all that did was raise rents, and they've been up $180 a week under Chris's government. Since they were advised, do not do that. Why? Because it adds cost to landlords, it leads to higher rents, and therefore makes renting more difficult.
So you're promising to bring rents down?
So what we want to do is unwind the Bright Line test from 10 to 2 years, and over the course of our term...
I'll take that as a no.
Will you guarantee that landlords will pass on the benefits of your tax cuts to their tenants?
Well, what I guarantee is you won't see a $180
it's a pretty
per
simple
week
question.
increase.
Will landlords pass on the benefit of your tax cuts to their tenants?
What you're doing is not putting any downward pressure on rents.
I think that's
those
a no.
Those two prescriptions would do exactly
I want to ask you a more philosophical question. Do you remember what it felt like to own your first home at 24? Do you remember the security that it gave you, and how important is that for Kiwis?
Well, I remember how I felt. Chris and I were just talking about it in the break, and I was just saying, for Amanda and I, we were newly married. Amanda was in her first job as a teacher. I was in my first job out of university. We stretched ourselves into a house in Niall in Wellington, and then all of a sudden the interest rates went up. And I remember sitting there with our TV on a box, and we had one deck chair between us, and that was it was an incredibly worrying and stressful moment, if I'm honest with you.
The same question for you, Chris Hipkins. Do you know and do you remember what that security felt like when you brought your first home? You know that you can send your kids to that school. You know where you've got a base.
I absolutely do. And I want to make sure that young New Zealand families starting out for the first time get to experience that same feeling. I don't want New Zealand to be a nation of renters. I want them to be a nation of homeowners. That's why I don't think that making life better for landlords through tax breaks should be our priority right at the moment.
But Jessica, can I just say, the majority of landlords are mum and dad investors who've got 1 or 2 rental properties to augment their retirement savings. They're not evil property speculators, as Chris likes to position them as. They're good people, hard-working people, probably members of the Labor Party, who actually got something going for their retirement, and they look after the house and they provide good accommodation to tenants.
We're seeing an accumulation of landlords. We're getting more and more mega landlords now, and Christopher Luxon and the National Party's priority is to give them tax breaks, which Christopher Luxon himself has just admitted they won't be passing on to their tenants. I think we can do better than that. We need to build more houses. We need more affordable state house rentals. That's what we're focused on building, because that's the way we'll get out of the housing crisis.
I want to go now to a viewer question and to put it to both of you. We've got a young mum who immigrated here, and she wanted to hear an answer from both of you. Here is her question.
My name is Alva. I've been living in New Zealand for the past 14 years and I have 2 Kiwi-born daughters. My question is, what is one policy you could implement that will make New Zealand a better place to live in 10 years' time?
Chris Hipkins, what do you say to Alba?
I would say that free dental care is the one policy that I would be really proud to campaign on, to say it will make New Zealand a better place. Looking after people's oral health, looking after their dental care will have huge life benefits for people. It means that their dental health will be better throughout their lives. It is affordable, and it means that we're going to see fewer problems later on in life.
And for you, Chris Luxon?
What we need to build for Alva is a world-class education system, because that's going to set her up well to go out and do anything she wants to do in the world. That's what happened for me, and that's what I'd want to happen for her too.
All right, well, we'll leave it there for this break. Stay with us. The most pressing issues facing the world is the final topic of our debate. ACT MP Simon Court told a pre-election debate that there's no climate emergency. So is he right? We'll find out from the leaders after the break. You're watching the First Leaders debate, and I'm here with Chris Hipkins and Chris Luxon. And I want to put a question to both of you now. I'll start off with you, Chris Luxon. Do we have a climate emergency, and how serious is it?
Yes, we do, and it's very serious. And that's why we're deeply committed to delivering on our climate commitments that we've made. Net zero by 2050, the NDC commitments in 2030, and also we've supported the government on emissions reductions budgets.
What's your response to that?
Yes, we absolutely have a climate emergency, and it's one of the reasons that I've been really clear in the time that I've been Prime Minister that we need to focus on the things that we can do that get our emissions down as fast as possible, because getting our emissions down is the way we'll tackle climate change. I know Christopher and National have signed up to the 2050 targets, and yet they want to cut all of the things that the government's currently doing to reduce our emissions.
What's your response to that?
Well, our response is that we're committed to the goals. We're just not committed to the way of delivering those goals that this government is. We're going to do it differently.
Well, you haven't said how.
Well, let me tell you how we're going to do it. I mean, the first thing we're going to do is actually double the amount of renewable electricity in this country. We need to be able to do that to make the transition on transport and manufacturing. We think we can do that. We've seen some ridiculous situations.
You think you can do it, or you know you can
No, I know we can
target?
do it. Actually, if we do that, we take a third of our emissions off the table. But we have an abundant supply of wind, geothermal and solar energy in this country, lots of renewable energy sources, and we are consenting them too slowly, and we need to get them built quicker and faster.
The National Party said that they'll do away with the ban on offshore oil and gas exploration.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's just be pragmatic about it. In 2021, you ended up importing a decade's worth of Indonesian coal, and the reason was because we had a dry year. So we actually need gas as a transitory energy source.
We are at the lowest
it's better
level
than
of
coal. It's not
than since 2013, and that's because of the work our government has done to drive towards renewable.
I want to put
and the
to you
National
about
Party's
the
opposed every one of them.
this. I mean, July was the hottest month that we've had. We've had Cyclone Gabrielle. Even this week we had some wild weather in Wellington and the South Island. Are you acting with enough urgency on climate change? Because a lot of people sitting at home feel really worried.
I think we need to act with ever more urgency when it comes to climate change. Now's not the time to take the foot off the accelerator. Christopher and the National Party, for example, want to kick out decisions around agricultural emissions till the next decade. I don't think we can afford to wait that long. It's not only bad for the environment, it's actually bad for our economy.
Are you taking it seriously enough?
Absolutely, I'm taking it seriously. But here's the dilemma, right? Our farmers actually feed 40 million people around the world. We're amongst the most carbon efficient in the world already. When you actually do what Chris is doing, which is to knock off 20 to 25% of them in a short period of time, all that happens
That's simply not true.
All that happens is that production goes off overseas to a less efficient country, less efficient farm.
Interesting, because that's the dilemma, isn't it? We rely on farmers, and yet we have to reach this target.
But there is a way through, Jessica, because all you're doing then is actually sending that production offshore to a less efficient place, and in the process you make every single New Zealander poorer. So what do we have to do? We have to be able to give our farmers all the tools and technologies they can. We have to give them credit for all the good stuff that they're doing on farm, and then we introduce sensible agricultural pricing.
I want to put a question
what we're doing.
to
We're
you.
doing all of those things. We're just not going to wait till next decade to do it.
If you are to become the next Prime Minister, one of the issues that you will have to grapple with is climate change, obviously. And when we talk to people about this in the Ipsos survey, only half of people feel like climate change is going to have a direct impact on them. That seems like a really big problem, and don't you need to get the other half of New Zealand on board?
Well, we do, and actually, as we said, we'll do that through actually doubling the amount of renewable electricity. We'll do that by building out an actual nationwide EV charger network.
Chris,
we'll do that
do you
by having a
appreciate
sensible
that
approach
you
to
have to get
agriculture.
the other half of Kiwis on board on this? They don't get it.
Absolutely, but cutting the clean car discount and reducing the number of electric vehicles coming into New Zealand isn't going to do that. That's what Christopher and the National Party are proposing. They're proposing to wind back all of the measures we've put in place that have seen outcomes. Chris, you always talk about outcomes. Here's an outcome for you. Our emissions have gone down 3 years in a row, and you want to cut all of the things that we've done that have delivered that.
Well, the emissions going down is a good thing. That's what we both need to do under successive governments over the long term. That's exactly what the goal is, and that's what we're aligned about.
You've got the goal, but you've got no way of delivering it.
But here's an example, right? What we need in this country, if we want to drive more electric vehicle penetration, is in fact a nationwide EV charging network.
Well, let's ask a really
Range
simple question
anxiety
about
is the
this.
major reason.
No, I want to ask a really simple question about this. Do you worry about the world you're leaving your kids and your grandkids?
Yes, I do. And I think you've only got to go through the experiences of the last 6 months in New Zealand to see that.
Absolutely. But we don't need the government to fund an electric vehicle charging network, because if we have the uptake of EVs that we've got at the moment, the market will deliver that. It's like saying that we should deliver petrol stations if there aren't enough of them up and down the country.
I mean,
actually, the market's going to do that.
I feel like you're both getting... And I mean, this is a really big issue. We've got school kids marching in the street over this. What do you say to them sitting at home when it comes to climate change? What guarantee do you give them that both of you are going to take this seriously?
Well, I think we're reading from the conversation today, we are both deeply committed to delivering on our climate goals and commitments. The way in which we go about delivering those will be different. In the National Party, I think you've got to have a plan and you've got to get things done.
What are you doing personally?
Wait, can I answer the question?
Yeah, yep.
We have a proven track record of reducing our emissions. We've got an actual plan to drive our emissions down. Everybody can see what our plan is, and it's not just a bunch of slogans that aren't actually going to reduce our emissions.
Personally, what are you doing to change your lifestyle? Have either of you considered being vegetarian in the past? I think I can answer that question, Chris Hipkins, given the amount of sausage rolls I've seen you eat over this campaign. But have you ever considered that? And what are you doing personally? Just a couple of quick answers.
Oh, look,
on
as
that.
a family, we embraced recycling some time ago, a decade ago, and so we work quite hard at that.
I have an EV, I'm a recycler, and I'm very focused on making sure
you have an EV
reducing
as
waste.
well.
Well, you might have heard my wife's probably got the most famous EV in the country, I'll just put it to you. Yeah.
Is climate change, Chris Luxon, our nuclear-free moment?
It's certainly something we've got to take incredibly seriously. Is it
our nuclear-free moment?
Again, I don't react to bumper stickers and headlines, and I think, at the end of the day, it's actually a major crisis. No, it's a major crisis, and it's really important that we actually deal with it with great urgency. But you've got to have a plan, and you've got to chunk down those categories of emissions piece by piece, and that's what we'll do.
Chris Hipkins, is this our nuclear-free moment?
Yes, it is, and we've got a concrete plan that is driving our emissions down, and the National Party wants to stop every one of those things that's driving our emissions down.
For fairness and balance, I'll give you the last word on this to round out the debate. So what do you say in response to Chris Hipkins here?
Well, look, what I just say to Chris is that I don't think giving $140 million to a company that's making $2.1 billion profit as a big corporate is the right thing to do. I actually think big corporates, as a former CEO, should take responsibility and actually deliver their commitments on climate change themselves, and they should be encouraged to do that really heavily. Any CEO watching this, you need to get going.
And if they don't?
Well, they're going to be. They'll face the reality of it, which they'll build bad businesses, and ultimately they won't. They'll actually get a punishment through the ETS system as well. So for me, I wouldn't give.
So we're just relying on corporate goodwill to reduce our emissions.
Because you're messing with my last word to Chris Luxon.
I get the last word still. I just wouldn't give $140 million of taxpayers' money to wealthy corporates.
Okay, and that has to be the last word just to make everything fair. So that is the end of the debate. Chris Hipkins and Chris Luxon, I'd like to thank you both very much for your time tonight. I've had a great time. I hope you have too. They'll face off again here on the 12th of October, and that's just a few days out from the election. So has one of you convinced them that they're the right Chris for the job? Who do you think won tonight's debate? Jack's been watching pretty closely. What do you reckon?
Oh, well, I couldn't possibly comment, gentlemen, other than to say there was, I think, a clear standout tonight. And her name was Jessica Mutch McKay. You were outstanding.
I'll slip you the $20.
After the break, though, I will be back with an expert panel of political insiders with their analyses. But Jess, well done. You can go and put your feet up.
Thank you so much, I will. And thank you so much for being with us tonight. And me and the team will see you next time.
Kia ora, tiwi mai, hoki mai, welcome back. We have had plenty to take in over the last 90 minutes, so to help you make sense of it all, to dissect how well both leaders went in our first debate for the 2023 election, I'm joined by our expert panel here this evening. With me is former MP Tau Henare, One News Deputy Political Editor Mikey Sherman and former Labour leader David Cunliffe. Kia ora koutou, thanks for being here. Sure. Right, I want your first impressions, one by one. Tau, you're up first. What do you reckon?
Wake me up. It was boring.
Are you? Come on, you can't say that.
I mean, there were no. There's no physical abuse.
Well, they're coming from you.
There's no verbal abuse.
We've moved away.
I mean, it was very mild.
Not like the old days, Tony.
Politics have changed in the last 20 years.
And that's the trouble.
Mikey, first impressions.
I mean, I definitely think that Chris Hipkins could have brought a lot more fight, a lot more mongrel to the debate. It did start off quite fiery and then it hit a little bit of a lull, particularly again in terms of Chris Hipkins. But then again, at the end, I think we kind of saw it fire up again.
Yeah, what did you think, David?
Look, if you use a sort of Rugby World Cup analogy, Chris Hipkins needed to win this outright because he's behind in the pool. I think it was close to a draw. I think Chippy was at his best when he was chipping, but in the first half of the debate, he gave far too much free run to Chris Luxon, who made the best of it. He was well prepared and stepped up.
That was interesting, wasn't it? There were quite distinct communication styles, at least in the first half of the debate. And I know that when we were watching it backstage, you were all commenting on that. Is that something you noticed as well, Mikey, that perhaps Christopher Luxon was being more assertive and getting in there and interrupting people?
He was certainly being way more assertive. He was interrupting every chance he could get, and it really kind of ankle tapped Chris Hipkins in terms of getting a good run on. He just couldn't get it running. And in terms of Chris Hipkins, I do wonder if it was a little bit of strategy on his part, because on the campaign, we have seen him fiery. He has been taking every dig that he can get at the National Party leader. So perhaps, based on recent polls that we've seen as well around who the public feel is being a bit more negative, perhaps he didn't want to come in too hot.
Yeah, what did you think, Ty?
There was no up the wires moment. There was no excitement. I think the team is right. I think what Chris Hipkins tried to do was be too mild and too mannered, and it ended up he was chasing Luxon. And I think that if that happens, you're going to lose.
Yeah. We have a couple of little exchanges that we want to reflect on. So having shadowed the party in the last couple of weeks, it was perhaps inevitable that the talk around National's tax plan would enter the debate tonight. There was one exchange in particular that had our panellists talking. Let's have a quick listen to that.
This is the thing about the National Party. It's all about marketing and spin. When you break it down, the National Party's tax cuts don't actually add up that much to most New Zealanders.
So what do you
and
say
National can't say how they're going to pay for it.
We think we can sell 1,600 to 1,700 houses to foreigners, actually at about almost $3 million average price, at a 15% tax. That all adds up, and actually as a result, we've had that independently verified by independent economists who've actually said that's quite plausible, that's quite conservative.
Right.
There's been a lot of attention on this issue over the last couple of weeks. David Cunliffe, how did you think Christopher Luxon navigated that question?
Look, I have to say the whole section was probably a lose-lose. Chris Hipkins did not want to talk about the signature policy GST off vegetables. Chris Luxon was trying to frame him up on it. Chris Luxon's numbers don't appear to add up unless you sell half of Auckland to foreigners, which people don't want. So he's in a tough spot. But I have to say his prepared lines were very controlled. And again, Chris Hipkins let him get them out. And if there was a tactical kind of error, it's, as Mikey said, when the opposition's got the ball, you've got to ankle tap them and get it back. You need the turnover.
I'm no expert about how these things look at home, but I have been known for pursuing people when they don't answer questions from time to time. And it was very telling to me that when Chris Hipkins was asked about GST, he didn't mention it. He was asked a direct question about GST and he immediately pivoted. Likewise, when Christopher Luxon was asked what happens if you don't bring in the revenue to pay for your tax cuts, same thing, immediately shifted the conversation to an area in which he was more comfortable. What did you think of the way he navigated that?
Because they're both do-nothing policies. They don't go out onto Queen Street and grab somebody and say, this is what we're doing.
But they are the centrepiece policies, and what is the defining issue for this election?
Absolutely, and I do think it was quite damaging actually for Chris Hipkins. You know, we had Christopher Luxon take a hit at the Labour Party policy saying it would only save around $5 a week, and Chris Hipkins allowed that to go unchallenged. He didn't hit back, and he didn't kind of tack on other policies that Labour is promising that could beef up that whole package for families, like National has done with its $250 a fortnight package for those squeezed middle that they're talking about.
Toe is right here, I think, Mikey, coming in here. Look, both of the leaders are missing the boat because the policies of both parties are missing the boat. Everybody knows that to get New Zealand through the COVID pandemic, we had to pump money into the economy. Everybody knows that's fueled property prices, which has benefited property owners and not the others. Most people want a capital gains tax. Neither of them is offering real tax reform, and that's the problem. That's part of the reason that a lot of Kiwis are feeling what Toe has said. This is a snore.
Like I said, the cost of living and the state of the economy is a defining issue in this election, but having been in the headlines fairly frequently, crime is something we have had a lot of discussion on lately as well. Both parties' approaches, unsurprisingly, vary. The leaders making a case tonight for how their parties would tackle crime.
There's been a 30% increase in violent crime, a 100% increase in retail crime. We've got 9 gang members now for every 10 police officers, and we have a ram raid every twice a day in this country.
We put in place the circuit breaker initiative because we've got to break that cycle. Three-quarters of the kids who have gone into the circuit breaker initiative haven't gone on to reoffend. Christopher's solution is boot camps.
The numbers
80% of the kids that have gone to boot camps, when National tried them last time, went on and reoffended.
So you were saying backstage that this is an area in which Labour perhaps would have felt vulnerable heading into the debate. How did you think Chris Hipkins handled it?
I thought Chippy was. I thought Chippy was very good in terms of hitting back. The key for Luxon was he actually got his lines out, even though 2 ram raids every day is bollocks. But it doesn't matter. He got his lines out and he looked assertive.
The issue with those lines is that Chris Luxon had very short, sharp, snappy lines tonight, and Chris Hipkins, in comparison, had very long-winded, waffly lines, and it just loses people at home, you know. And the other thing that I will say, though, is that I thought Chris Hipkins was strong in hitting back on the boot camps and kind of pointing out that actually there is an 80% fail rate on those boot camps, whereas what the government is trialling at the moment, their pilot, has an 80% success rate.
Yeah, that was one of the defining lines in that exchange. How did you think it went down, Dave?
Look, I think National won the crime section, but they usually do. Toe's right. Actually, a lot of the policies don't stack up on the evidence, but they got their lines out. And I thought, very interestingly, this was the segment where Chris Luxon spoke to the far right. He's trying to pull them back in on law and order issues because he's worried about the size of the ACT vote. He was definitely not going for the centre ground in the crime debate. He had most of the airtime. Some great lines by Chris Hipkins there, but actually I think National carried that segment.
So where did Christopher Luxon do that? Where did he speak to the far right specifically?
Oh, because he was talking about boot camps, because he was talking about ram raids. He's stoking fear, and Chris Hipkins pulled him up on it. He did use the, I've got nothing, or you've got nothing to be afraid of. And Luxon reacted to that. And that was one of the points where I thought the momentum of the debate started to turn against the tide back to Chris Hipkins' favour, because he did ankle tap him in the middle of a monologue where he'd been going strong until then. And after that, Chris Hipkins started to come in more often.
I'm not sure that I would agree that targeting and looking at things like boot camps is pandering to that far right vote. I think that's maybe a little bit of a stretch. But in terms of the crime issue, I think that Chris Hipkins, what was quite telling was that he did not hit back at Luxon when Christopher Luxon said, hey, you're with Te Pāti Māori, you're with the Greens, and by the way, you're with the gangs as well.
Absolutely
that
outrageous.
Was an absolute dog whistle, and Chris Hipkins just let it slide completely.
Okay, if we were all to play Captain Hindsight here for a moment, David Cunliffe, if you had been in Chris Hipkins' shoes, you'd heard that barb, what would you have done?
I would have jumped right down the camera. The gangs have nothing to do with the Labour Party, and if I hadn't hit him round the shoulders, I'd have hit him round the thighs.
What is it like to be in this environment? To be in a leaders' debate?
Look, it's like a boxing match. You prep for it like a boxing match. It is a sport, but it's a very important sport because the issues that we're talking about affect every voter. And like it or hate it, the reality is this election, the combined vote of these two, what some people are calling the purple parties, is the lowest ever. It's the lowest ever because people don't feel that they're actually addressing all the problems in a meaningful way.
And just quickly, speaking of purple party, did anyone else notice the colour of the tie that Chris Hipkins was wearing? See, Christopher Luxon had a big, bold blue tie.
Bold and blue.
And I don't want to get into what people are wearing, but Chris Hipkins, he was not wearing a red tie. Now that says something.
Well, it's maroon. It's Queensland.
Okay, well, let's not spend too long analysing the sartorial choices. I would say, though, on the purple parties issue, what was telling to me is in those quick-fire questions, both of them had almost identical answers for almost everything, right?
Yeah, and sometimes when they disagreed, they crossed over.
I mean, if you needed an education in the pursuit of the so-called middle voter in New Zealand, that was it for me. When it came to those quick-fire questions, both of them almost agreed on everything. A couple of new things came out of it. Number one, Chris Hipkins said sugar in schools. He would support banning fizzy drinks in high schools. Christopher Luxon said that he supported having free lunches in schools, but I suspect that
for everybody.
It's going to be one for our newsroom to go and follow up because I suspect
sausage rolls
that might have been an instance in which he misspoke. How important in the context of this campaign, David, is this debate relative to other years?
Oh, typically this is the highest viewership debate of the campaign. People estimate around 800,000 or more people watch this. So it is huge, yeah. I should have worn a suit. No, it's a huge moment. And like I said at the start, Chris Hipkins needs to win this debate. And there are parts of it that he did win, but I think on points it's pretty close to a draw because they varied section by section.
Okay.
Does it give Chris Hipkins the momentum he needs? That's the question.
All right, plenty more to come from our panel. Hey, ako and e Kiwis, stay with us. We will be back in a couple of minutes. Kia ora, welcome back. I am with our political panel analysing how Chris Hipkins and Christopher Luxon did in the first live leaders debate of this 2023 election. Before the break, I gave David a question and I want to give you guys an opportunity to answer as well. In the context of this specific campaign, how important is this debate, particularly for Chris Hipkins, to try and get some cut through? Mikey?
I think it's absolutely crucial because, of course, Chris Hipkins is on the back foot in the polls. It has been a challenging week for him, to say the least. What has gone in his favour, perhaps, is the fact that it has also been a challenging past week for Christopher Luxon with the issues around the foreign buyers tax. And I think from a campaign perspective, what I've noticed is that because Chris Hipkins is experienced as a politician, he has been able to absorb the pressure of the campaign, of the media scrutiny, of the public scrutiny in terms of the polls a lot more easily than Christopher Luxon has.
Toe?
I would have said that tonight. I think the Nats are like France in the opening game of the World Cup.
Yes.
Labour are like the All Blacks. They sort of made some mistakes. They looked all right in some parts, but mate, they're going to have to go to the next one and they're going to have to get down and dirty. They're going to have to unleash whatever they've got in the tank because it doesn't look good at the moment.
Yeah, knowing that there are potentially a couple of 100,000 voters who might not have made up their minds, especially in this campaign, is there going to be a better opportunity for either leader to really assert themselves when it comes to leadership and communication, David?
2 more leaders' debates and they'll be in the media campaigning hard every single day. Both of them are hard workers. Both of them are resilient on the campaign trail. They will leave it all on the track, right down to the last night.
Chris Hipkins has no other option but to bring the mongrel and to bring the fight to the next debate because he was far too standoffish, especially in that middle part of the debate, and he just allowed Christopher Luxon to run for a very long time unchallenged and just delivering his messages one after the other. He cannot afford that.
Can't let the other side with the ball for 5 phases. You just got to tackle.
Yeah, well, this is interesting, isn't it? Because you know Chris Hipkins relatively well, David, and he is a scrapper in your eyes.
Look, he's tough, he's determined, and I think he's campaigned pretty well. I think the issues for both Labour and National are really are they really hitting the nail on the head in terms of the things that Kiwis are worried about? Sure, cost of living is important, but it's not the whole deal. People are worried about climate. They are worried about the international security situation. They are worried about the economy being on 2 cylinders, and they're not hearing coherent answers that they believe in from either party. That's why the combined vote is down, and Chris Hipkins especially, take the football analogy again. He has to kick it out of the park. He's got nothing to lose.
Interestingly, you thought when it came to foreign policy, that tricky question around China and Taiwan was actually one of the moments in which Chris Hipkins shone.
Because he believed in his answer and he looked like a statesman, same as he did actually on health and on co-governance. He felt them, he communicated in his body language that he was determined, and that's what I think we need to see in the next debates.
And he has the experience. He's been around long enough to sort of know the depth of those two issues, particularly around the health issues. He really ran rings around Christopher Luxon on that one, I thought, and that showed the experience that he has. Christopher Luxon talks about the fact that he isn't a career politician as though that's in his favour, but actually there is some merit to having experience and really understanding the issues in depth. I don't think we saw enough depth from Christopher Luxon.
See, I think back to the sort of sports analogy. I don't think this is the debate that Chippy needed to win. You know, I think he could afford to lose it or draw it. I think the bigger ones are the next two ones where he knows the score. I mean, it's a bit like Penrith versus Warriors. We all knew that the second string Warriors team wasn't going to win, but boy, did they turn up against Newcastle, and that's that up the wires moment. And I think that's what Chippy needs, because I do think that Luxon
is tough though, right? Because he's only had 9 months for this campaign. I mean, I tried it with 11. That didn't work too well either, right? So this is
10 years.
He's had 10 years of practice. But a campaign as Prime Minister, as leader of the party, you need to have all your guns blazing from day one, and you need the policy package to win.
I'm very glad, Toe, that you managed to get up the wires in here. That was his one stipulation for tonight. Yes, very impressive indeed. I want to show you another clip now. Back in the health portion of the debate, the two leaders were questioned on outcomes for Aotearoa's Māori and Pasifika peoples. So let's remind ourselves of their responses.
Actually, the prioritisation and the delivery of public services should always be on the basis of need, not ethnicity.
At the moment, Māori and Pacific New Zealanders wait for longer for healthcare than other New Zealanders. The fact that the health system is committed to doing something about that is a good thing. Māori and Pacific New Zealanders should not be discriminated against by the health system, which there is clear evidence they have been in the past.
Why do you think that there is that gap, and why haven't you done more to address that?
We are addressing that, and unfortunately other political parties are choosing to use that for race-baiting politics.
How do you respond to that?
Well, that's just not right. I mean, we have a series of public services we make available to all 5.2 million people across New Zealand. You've got to always come through the lens of people's needs, not their ethnicities. That's the deal here.
See, I thought you could make an argument at the very least that both of them actually look quite strong on that argument.
Yeah, no. Look, this is one that really got me going inside, and I wanted to jump up and say, "Come on!" I mean, I've heard the lines from Luxon so many times over the last 30 years, and at least the Labour Party, and I know I'm a bit biased, I can be a bit biased, but at least the Labour Party have decided that they need to do something. You know what really amazed me? By Māori, for Māori was invented by the National Party as of tonight. What a lot of rubbish.
They should have had you up here on the debate stage tonight.
So for a bit of crossover commentary, I think Labour is vulnerable on the fact that it might have had the right intentions, but the delivery hasn't been there. Chris Hipkins' response to that is to tone back the expectations, bonfire the policies. The risk is, you know, if you want to vote national, you'll vote national, right? And so I think it's a really, really fine line he's walking. I think he did feel that, and it did come across. But we need to give Chris Luxon some points. He's been extremely well prepared. He got a lot of ammunition out in this debate, and in the first half of the debate, Chris Hipkins let him do it.
And I think where his strength was on that health issue, because you're right, he was strong, is that he was speaking to his voter base. And a lot of that voter base They don't want to see a separate Māori health authority. That's why the National Party is promising to reel that back in. So he has no qualms about saying those things and being quite forthright in those things.
Okay.
See, I think Luxon was able to slap him, but not enough to damage him.
Okay, we're almost out of time. Before we let you go, I hate to reduce these things to binaries, but I know everyone always does. Was there a winner? Was there a loser in your eyes? Has this meaningfully shifted the dial? We'll get an answer from each of you. To, you kick things off.
Nah, there's no winner, no loser. I actually think it is a draw. I think it's enough. We heard enough from each of them, but they sort of sound the same and even look the same.
Okay.
I agree with To in that the next two political debates are going to be crucial for both of them, and that it wasn't necessarily something that someone needed to win tonight. If I did have to, I do have to hang out with them on the campaign trail, so I need to be careful here, guys. But on the issue of substance, Hipkins, but the game, the boxing, if we're going to go with the boxing analogy, you won't win it on technicality. You won't win it on technical points, all right? You win it with the hearts and minds of people at home. Oh my gosh, that sounds like a cliche. But I just think those snappy, quick snap lines from Luxon probably resonated him a bit more.
We all depend far too much on sport, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
In the boxing match, Chris Luxon won the first few rounds. Chris Hipkins won the back few. Chris Hipkins needed a knockout and he didn't get it. So tactical draw, strategically, Labour's still got to pull some rabbits out of the hat.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us and for that analysis of the First Leaders debate. To our panellists here in the studio, Tau Hinare, Mikey Sherman and David Cunliffe, Ngā mihi kia koutou. Thanks so much for being here. Don't forget to have your say on how the leaders performed on our website, onenews.co.nz/vote compass. There it is there. You can catch up on any moments you missed from the debate on TVNZ+. That's where you will also find a version with sign language interpreters. For now, though, from the whole One News team, Pō Mārie e te iwi. Good night.